Morning, gentlemen, or afternoon.
Good morning.
10:30.
More than enough.
Right? Yeah, we have a pretty interesting one today, I think. We're a little bit different format and kind of being able to dive deep into one topic. Introductions again. So Derek Booker over here, CTO, one of the co-founders for Triden Group. So I'm happy to have everybody here and looking forward to diving into, I don't know what episode we're on, 9 or 10 now, maybe, or something like that, the podcast. So
10 and that double digits.
Yeah, wow, we're officially double digits now. We're going to be a teenager soon. That's awesome.
Is it called a habit yet?
Right.
Nice. Well, I'm Brian Gibbs. I'm our CISO here and help with all of our sales team as well. So excited to be here to talk about this topic today. Sammy?
Yep, and you got Sammy Morar here, Senior Security Principal at Triden Group. Also very excited what we have on the agenda for today. Should be a pretty fun, but also a controversial issue to talk about.
I think everything in security is controversial at some point. I know Brian was pretty amped up to come into the office and talk about this one today. So,
well, I made sure to end the last podcast with this topic, the plant
that's
the
true.
seed.
You did kind of tease us here.
So we've had 2 weeks to water it.
Yeah. So Brian, if you want to maybe kind of give us the high level, and we'll
definitely. Yeah. So there was a sealed warrant that was released, essentially by the FBI, that they went into several hundred, they don't say the specific number of these impacted Exchange servers and removed compromised web shells. So what's interesting to me about this is that, one, it did not patch the vulnerability, right? So if they removed the web shell, it was still vulnerable and could be attacked again. The second thing is they just did a best effort to notify that they were touched to remove it. So for an example, if you do your domain name hiding or masking that you can hire, right? And it sends it off. It could be completely going to a mailbox that doesn't even exist, right?
Yeah.
And does your proxy forward, it's DNS proxy, I guess is the appropriate term for it. And so does it even go to the right person and anybody be informed that
does that person even still work there anymore? I mean, how many times do webmasters or admins change over the years, or nobody even puts 2 cents into that kind of stuff?
Or it goes to some webmaster address that nobody gets.
Yeah.
As an example. So that's one second thing. And then really the third thing is that if we're going to start setting this precedent, are business leaders going to just start backing off? And do they really even care about patching and maintaining their systems anymore if the FBI is going to come rush in every single time? So I know we can dive into a whole bunch of this, but that's just the high level kind of deal on this. And this is the second time the FBI has done something to this level. Back in 2011, I guess, Sammy, we were chatting earlier, and it was a little less impactful or invasive, if you will, with the command, the C2 that they took down. So I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, and then we dive a little bit deeper into this.
Yeah. Well, backing up to what you were saying earlier, too, it is a bit strange to me that they're going in, removing these shells from these systems, but not applying any kind of mitigation or patching. Because then you think to yourself, like, what's the benefit? Because I suppose there is the immediate benefit of getting rid of that access, that initial access, but odds are is these actors have already set up additional ways to maintain persistent access in these networks through other stealthy backdoors. So even and the actual systems themselves are still unpatched. So you can actually just go and re-exploit the system and regain the web shell. So it was kind of peculiar to see that kind of behavior, and it does make you kind of dig into the underlying questions. It's like, what was the real intention there, right? And then the other thing you mentioned about the notification process, that also kind of opens up another attack vector, because the notification process in and of itself, if an actor could exploit that using phishing strategies that make it look like it's coming from a legitimate FBI address, you could potentially attack or infect a whole new suite of targets using this new attack vector that the FBI has themselves created. So it's very interesting to see the precedent that they've set for this.
Definitely. And then think about all those security warning banners and all of that. And then what if they got data that they shouldn't have gotten?
Correct.
Right? So they get in there and maybe they cause damage or some type of other impact, right? Like I know the warrant was very clear that they were only allowed to remove the web shell.
Right.
But what are other impacts and things that could have occurred from that? So it's a lot to really think about and digest as we break it down today.
Yeah, there's so many variables to this whole thing, right? I mean, one, I think you guys bring up good points about, just notification kind of at the base layer. If you kind of read through the warrant, it was an interesting read about, they were saying, hey, we're going to try, who is lookups, and then go to the ISP and this and that. But, to your guys' point, those things take time, and, it opens up a whole other channel of communication. I mean, kind of Sammy joking, not joking, that could be a next, great phishing campaign we do for our customers and say, hey, like we're the FBI and this is an official warrant, and, make it look legit. And this kind of now questions that type of concept. And it's like, it kind of goes back to the thing we talked about in the past a few times. It's like not quite a hacking back in this case, it's a little bit different. Like, like I can see, why they're trying to do this to kind of help spread it or, stop the spread, so to speak. But, the fact that it was just like, hey, we're going to remove this single web shell, be very specific, is very odd to me. I mean, that's kind of like, I guess if I was paying for the service, I'd be kind of pissed. It's like, hey, well, you just you fixed it, but you didn't like actually stop my leak, right? Which to me is the bigger issue here, and education, and like what if they didn't get consent, or it's so easy that like yes, it was specific to remove this specific web shell and this and that, but as we all know, if they're in there, that means they could easily move around or create other things, and this kind of opens up a whole nother interesting concept. And I think it was kind of a gray area for me is they started in Houston, Texas area, talking about various districts and this and that, but there were so many quote unquote companies that were somewhat redacted from what they were going after. But you don't know, like, okay, does this mean the company is headquartered in Texas? Do they just have an office in Texas? Like now you're kind of crossing boundaries and state lines. Like what if they're an international company? Like that just raises a whole other slew of concerns, in my opinion, too, on some of this.
And actually, to your point, in 2016, the Supreme Court actually moved to allow U.S. judges to issue search and seizure warrants outside of their district. So not only, what's also unprecedented about this is that this is totally within their legal ability to do so. And so the other, to add on to what you were saying as well, is they actually, within the warrant itself, there was no precedent which required them to notify the system owners before they had performed this deletion or investigation. It was actually after the fact, because they felt that informing them may compromise the operation. I mean, to me, this just screams that, hey, we don't trust your guys' ability to take care of your own systems or to mitigate your own systems. And then it's like, who's to say that's where they stopped? I mean, they're accessing email servers. They could be accessing the content that's on that quite easily through that web shell, and there would be no checks or balances to indicate that they had it. And of course, could be all types of incriminating data within those emails themselves. Drug reports, pricing information, anything to do with the company could be within those emails. So it's very difficult to walk the line between is this almost some kind of like vigilante type behavior, or is this really more of a criminal type behavior, and it's a little bit difficult to distinguish.
I don't know. There's a lot of static coming in on your line right now, Sammy. I don't know what's going on.
Is it pretty bad?
No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. So, I want to think about what did some other nations do, and even things that we did, right? So CISA had some scripts out there to identify it. Microsoft provided some stuff up on GitHub. They did get the patching out. Granted, they knew about it for a little while, and it had been exploited for a couple of months before it all came out. But like in the UK, as an example, the National Cybersecurity Center, they helped people, 2,300 Windows machines in effect, actually remediate and clean that up. So instead of the other approach, they just opened up a hotline and a hot center that you could go into and get help and ask for it. So I think that's like a little bit of a difference, a partnership at that point. to help organizations. And is that really maybe that's where CISA is going to head, right? With this large budget that's being proposed to increase cybersecurity spending in the U.S. government, that maybe that's the direction that we're heading, is that we'll have resources and you can go and contact and get the help. And maybe this is just the start of all of that we're not quite there yet. And the FBI is just jumping in to help defend in the short term.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's almost like a different approach of like, I want to say proactive versus reactive, right? But I think your point about like, hey, I have this, cyber crisis hotline, through whoever it's going to be. And like, hey, I'm really struggling here. I know there's kind of certain tooling and, channels of communication now, but like maybe it takes an extra step further and actually helps with, putting you through to experts or getting you really in contact with the right resources who can stop this. And, to me, it's kind of like, okay, are we becoming now like internet police to some extent? Like, hey, if you can't handle your own stuff, is the government going to start just coming in and fixing everything to what they think is best? And then it's like, okay, that raises then a whole other question of issues on who's to determine what they should do, what they shouldn't do. And, I think we all know technology is so difficult because it changes, literally every day. And, we're so just integrated with it and what we do with our lives and, what we interact with that, I think, this is going to be the beginning of more of these, right? Like, let's say the next big, whatever attack you want to call it. I don't want to kind of call out names or anything, but, because, we all know that there's going to be more of these types of attacks and this and that. So does this kind of now open the door to say, okay, the government wants to step in really quickly now and kind of start to, I don't know, it could be profiling. They can understand who's got what network. Maybe there's, specific companies they want to, I don't want to say target, but research or keep on the radar, or, hey, there's, suspected of some other activity. This kind of gives another entry point into that network, right? And then we haven't even gotten into like compliance, like, hey, what if some of these were healthcare companies or they accessed, whether they did or didn't, but they could have accessed, PII type data, so many different things now, because we all know people do crazy things with email and put things where they shouldn't. But, this just raises, again, like millions of questions on, right versus wrong aside. Like, I see both sides, honestly. Like, I see why they were probably trying to do this to help slow, the spread and kind of the infection rate, if you will, and clean things up because it was so widespread so quickly. But, it's like, I think the approach could have been a little bit different in some of this regard too, right?
Yeah, well, just proactively getting out there and letting them know, hey, you're infected, we can help you get this removed type of thing, because they didn't mitigate it, right? All they did was stop any active web shell that was running. And then same way to your point, they could have already been in further and had access. And so if you don't contact and notify them, how are they going to be able to do their own DFIR, right?
Yeah.
And go through and make sure that they weren't breached to a further extent.
Yeah, and to your point, I think that's what we need to emphasize here is a collaborative effort between the government and the private sector, because even if they state, hey, these commands, our actions are not going to cause any interruptions to the server or modify any data, there's still risk there, because it's entirely possible that organization was performing their own active investigation. They were performing their own forensic analysis, and by deleting that system, by deleting that web shell, you may not be able to discover the evidence or the actions taken by the attackers through that backdoor. And therefore, the accidental deletion of that could actually affect any kind of security vendor or industry or organization that was either aware of the vulnerability or actively performing research against it. And it's also entirely possible it could have been a honeypot run by a security vendor. So the assumption that every one of these systems is potentially at risk is kind of I think, a very confident assumption. And I think taking a step back and finding that middle ground where it's a more collaborative effort, reaching out to them in advance, letting them know, so you offer them time to provide some kind of remediation and or compensating control for why that may exist or not. And so ultimately, I think that's where we may need to focus on here, is that collaborative effort.
So let's talk about maybe some mitigating controls just to help some of our viewers think about that, right? So Obviously, you have firewalls with IDS and IPS, and those signatures get updated, so that helps mitigate from some point. If you're in a hybrid mode and you've already flipped your email up to Office 365 and you still have that hybrid server, you should really consider locking the firewall down to only communicate to the Office 365 IP address, right? So there's some JSON files or some different scripting things out there that you can automate to update those IPs as they change with the different firewall providers. So that's another thing. And then some type of advanced detection software, right? So your CrowdStrikes, your Carbon Blacks, your whatever of the world type of things that would look for changes and things that come in on the system and drop a web shell as that example to trigger that, to stop that. Because if you can stop that lateral movement, that's huge right there, and you contain it. And then in this case, if you had only allowed Office 365 IP addresses, then you wouldn't be as vulnerable, right? I'm not going to say that you're not vulnerable, but you wouldn't be as vulnerable because you would have had an allow list in place.
Yeah, you're kind of squeezing, you know, like what you can kind of talk to, what you can't talk to. And I think it's a good point to kind of, you know, also keep in mind, like in the industry, which a lot of people know, but it's good to reiterate, is, you know, there's no one single thing you can really do. I mean, you could just unplug it, you know, have it physically powered off, but, you know, defeats some of the purpose in some of these things, right? But a truly, you know, layered approach to security, defense in depth, and those are kind of common words, but, you know, they do hold a lot of value in how you should approach things and, you know, what you can do. And, you know, the other thing too, I would probably add that, you know, really like, hey, do you have like, you know, an outside party, you know, like looking at your services, like, you know, a SOC or, you know, whether it's internal, external, and, you know, someone that's really actually looking at these things, right? And I think a lot of times we, you know, all of us in the industry kind of get alert fatigue, and, you know, it's just kind of bombarded with so many things. It's like, this probably, you know, could be false positive, or, you know, I'm not too worried about it. But in this case, you know, it's a pretty serious deal with, you know, I think at least 4 0 days that we know of for now, kind of what was coming. So a lot of, you know, to your point, you know, behavioral and looking at the kind of north, south, east, west kind of traffic is very key in these things, and, you know, seeing it from that perspective.
Yeah, and not to mention just actively staying on top of your patching process and having some kind of formalized patch management process. I find all too often it is reactionary, and as a result, things will get delayed or pushed off months from when it really should have been addressed because there's no formal process there. So being able to identify these bulletins from Microsoft, from CISA, and apply those remediations immediately, or at least within 30 days of a critical release of a critical patch, it can really is guidance really every company should be following and should be moving towards, no matter what level of maturity you are. To that point, Microsoft has released one-click exchange mitigations as well as a set of patches to remediate the proxy logon vulnerabilities. So really no excuse at this point. The tools are there for you to take care of it on your own, but at the same time, the feds are coming in and helping us out as well. So
professional services from the FBI. There you go.
At least their tax dollars are
tax dollars that work.
So let me ask
exactly.
you guys, like, do you think this came from like the FBI layer, or did it come from a different kind of not version, but, you know, level of government and kind of push down to them to execute?
I guess it depends on what group of people you ask, huh?
Their agencies, right?
Yep. If you get on Reddit, they'll happily tell you that they're really just replacing their old web shells with new ones, and that's what this whole effort is. But, you know, I guess it depends who you subscribe to.
What's that saying? Like misdirection, right? Look over here, but then I'm actually doing something over here.
Right. Right. And, you know, all jokes aside, it would be really hard for us to, I mean, particularly if these companies are having issues identifying and remediating these web shells, they're definitely not going to be able to identify actions such as peering into their email servers or their email server content at that point. So there is a big amount of trust we're also placing on the organizations and individuals. So, you know, with that, make your own, I guess, opinion, judgment based on all the facts. But I will say it is one of the things that's, and you mentioned it earlier, Derek, one of the things that's, I think, for me personally as a pen tester and as someone who performs these kinds of assessments, the move in 2016 to allow the U.S. judges to issue search and seizure warrants outside of their district it's quite a lot of power, and maybe that's where I believe the conversation should be focused around is not only that collaborative effort, but where are the limits of that piece of legislation, right? Because if you look into the actual individuals who approved the warrant itself, I mean, not to name names, but I didn't see a whole lot of InfoSec background in there, and these are the people who are approving the warrant. So it just it brings into question how that could be manipulated to essentially get
that's true
access outside
that's
of
where
the
lobbyists come to play, right? Because the
Correct.
politicians are not really the cybersecurity policy and practitioners in the world, right? So the lobbyists get involved and then push and drive a lot of that overall. So good points.
Yeah, I mean, if you have someone that that you're let's just say a judge or whoever that you're more friendly with in a certain district, but like you said, hey, I can authorize out of jurisdiction, then I'm just going to keep going with this person. If they kind of take care of me, I take care of them, type of thing. That raises another whole different level of more of the political kind of side of things and where that can go. But at that point, it can be sky's the limit. Like, okay, well, if it's someone in Florida and they want to go after something in California and they authorize it, then it's out of region, so to speak, but still kind of classifies. And we're so digitally connected now, it's everything kind of blurs and blends together. It's kind of hard to say one way or the other, like, no, like I'm defined in my little county or state here specifically with things like cloud computing and whatever. I mean, the stuff goes everywhere, so it's really interesting kind of how it's going to play out and what we're going to see more and more of this, I think, in that, internet policing, whatever you want to call it, play here in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think it even makes you wonder at a international level too, where this will kind of, go as well, because not sure, moving into a kind of similar but related topic. I don't know if you guys heard about the Emote malware that the Europol efforts basically had shut it down through introducing a module that would basically cause it to uninstall itself. But that to me was a good example of a positive group effort to take down what is famously known as a very malicious and prominent hacking infrastructure or malicious infrastructure. And as a result, I think we can look to some of these operations as examples at what we can introduce at a local level when you see that kind of collaboration between different stakeholders, and that therefore there is no single entity or influence that's really running the operation. I think you get better results that way, and the taking down of the Emote botnet was I think a clear example of that.
Definitely. So kind of like wrapping it up, I know there's an acting assistant director for the FBI and just kind of stated, this was the quote that was provided, that the operation is an example of the FBI's commitment to combating cyber threats through our enduring federal and private sector partnerships, which they do have great partnerships, right? There's the InfraGard, and then CISA's combined in with them through Homeland Security. So you do, I guess we are, the moral of the story is we're seeing better partnerships with the private sector overall. I guess I just wish that it was more, I would use the term opt-in than an opt-out approach, if you will, in this particular case where, they can issue out a bulletin and get people in. They did, Microsoft, CISA, and the FBI did a lot of good marketing on this. Like it was on the evening news. It was, the word was out there. It was a common thing that was talked about. So there was a great marketing campaign early on to get these systems patched. So on the flip side, I guess if there's only a couple hundred left that were infected, like I could understand why we want to clean that up and the risk to the rest of the nation from that perspective. So I get both sides of the coin, but I guess I just wish there was a little more transparency and effort to notify in advance and not post, if you will.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would say closing thought. I mean, I think overall the intention was in the right place, honestly. I think, we just been discussing it's, how to kind of go about this, because this is all kind of very new territory and this and that. So I think, that part of it and the policies and, how we work together and private and, government, and end user all kind of work together, still has a lot of room to grow. But, honestly, I feel it was the right, intention of where they're trying to get to and really, prevent this from becoming, even bigger than it, really could have been and it was in a lot of ways.
Yeah, definitely a lot of lessons learned on this one. But no, I think ultimately the intentions were there. As we move into the future, I'm sure we'll hash out the nuances and hopefully get to a point of transparency and collaboration where it's a positive effort towards identifying and remediating these threats, right? So that's the goal.
Definitely. Well, in closing, if there's things topics or different things that you want us to cover, please comment, get in touch with us, leave feedback, etc. for future shows, and hit that subscribe button wherever that button might be. I'm just going to try to get all the areas so I don't miss anything down below so that you're notified for the next time when we go live.
Yeah, subscribe and then let us know if you guys like this format, a little bit different. We kind of picked 1 or 2 topics and dove into it versus maybe 3 or 4. So yeah. Looking for feedback, hit that, that button and see everybody soon.
Like, comment, subscribe.
See ya.